I'm Rick Christie. I'm editor of the editorial page of the Post. I know Board Chairman Shaw and Mike Burke, but I haven't read Superintendent Fennoy yet. So welcome to the editorial board.
Appreciate it.
Howard Goodman, our editorial writer also. And we invited some guests, as you could probably see. Invited Sonia Isker and Andrew Marr to sit in with us, and if they're nice, they may be able to ask you a question. Okay. And our publisher Tim Burke, who couldn't resist being here. As soon as I told him about it, he said, "I'm there." He put it on his calendar. So we just wanted to just talk about things overall with the school district, since this is our first time getting together. But there we'll get down to some specifics also, please. And so let's get started with something I'm not completely familiar with yet. What are your top priorities, really, just to kind of get us going here for the school year coming up and everything. So can you start there? What are your top priorities?
I think for me, my top priorities are still student achievement. I think, the school board in their decision to hire a new superintendent was very clear that they wanted to continue on with the strategic plan and the successes that have happened since Dr. Vosa joined the team. And so since I was part of that team during that time, I believe in all of those things as well. And so it's easy for me to understand and to appreciate the track record of success we've had up until this point and what we want to do in the future. But I do think, obviously, since February 14th of 18, there's a very clear different focus on school safety and security and mental health. And so that, coupled with the governor's mandates, that is a top priority to meet those demands that have come from the state. And then also just speaking with the community around what they want to see. I mean, I think this idea, not only as a superintendent, but as a father of an elementary school student, this is sort of a new world, having full-time officers in elementary schools. And so figuring out what that looks like and making sure that we can meet that with great people, and then just also starting to really understand sort of the mental health issues that are starting to manifest themselves in a greater way, and how do we address that as a school system. So, but student achievement is our number one goal, but there's a lot of other things that are circling around that at this point.
Okay, and so starting with student achievement, because as you said, that's your primary responsibility. Let's talk about that some. Are there some specific areas in student achievement that you want to focus on? I mean, one that sticks out to us and that we want to delve into a little bit more is the third grade reading issue, which is a pretty big issue. Yes. And all research has shown that, I think, basically, if you don't have a kid reading on third grade level by then, it just gets more difficult as they go along. So talk about the further emphasis on that, because I know that was something that Avosa brought with him as well, but I'm not sure that, well, okay, I am sure. I'm sure that the strides that you guys wanted to make weren't made in that. So what do you do now differently to do better with that?
I think what we do differently is we really have to focus on early childhood education, so prior to third grade.
Prior to third grade.
You have to, in our areas where those numbers aren't being met, you really have to start thinking and working in collaboration with the community in our pre-K centers, and even further. I mean, there's some great work being done with the sort of purpose-built communities, really looking at the whole child and the whole community. There's a certain reality that my personal children have where we've exposed them to a lot. There's a lot of ongoing reading in our home since the day that they were born. So how do we help children get greater levels of vocabulary acquisition before they even get to kindergarten, which allows each of those next steps, kindergarten, first, second, third grade, not to be playing catch up and getting them up to that standard at the same time. We have to make sure that we invest heavily on that front end, so that third grade is just third grade, not first, second, and third grade at the same time.
Okay, and so is that involved bringing in more help from the community? Because, well, pre-K, I don't know where the district really starts officially gets involved here, but it sounds like you're talking about bringing in some other actors to help with this.
Yeah, I think
you have to anyway.
Well, you do. I think, where we have our pre-K centers, we have a little bit more control, but my children may go to a school outside of the school system, and I will make personal choices as a family as is the quality and the types of things my daughter is taught prior to kindergarten. I think in other communities, there's an opportunity to share information, begin to help professionally develop the people that sit in those and touch those kids early to make sure that they're meeting that standard, that which allows a better alignment once they get to the public school setting. In previous districts, that's where you see significant change because, again, over that period of time, they're just better prepared. They come to you better prepared. And so, you know, it is a Herculean task for a kindergarten teacher where you have some kids that come writing their own name, identifying letters and colors. In other cases, they can't do any of that. And you're talking about sort of the developmental factors with children that young. And so the more we can get them better prepared on the front end, the more likely we are to meet those targets once we get to third grade.
So where are you on accomplishing that goal?
Well, for me, I've been in the job for 3.5 months. So I think as a team, though, those conversations, and again, VOSA and the academic side of the house had already started a lot of that work. So we're definitely moving in that direction. I think, and even looking at the configurations of some of our schools differently. I think where we've had some of the biggest challenges, maybe, you know, we're looking at maybe taking, you know, multiple schools and saying, hey, this school will only focus on K1, 2. And then we may make another elementary school 3 through 5. Like, so we're as we go across the country and look at models that work, because part of another challenge in this regard is typically in Florida, you put your best teachers in third grade. And in some cases, you need some of your better teachers in kindergarten and first grade. And that is a paradigm shift, and it's sort of for principals, and speaking as a former principal.
Why are your best teachers in third grade?
Well, because that's your first.
I don't want to assume.
Well, as an elementary school principal, you have to make decisions, and so you want to put some of your stronger people where you're going to get graded.
Okay.
And so it's just a simple mathematical formula. I think we have to think a little differently. How do we bring the literacy and the teaching of reading at a higher level to our kindergarten and first grade teachers? And that's part of that sort of really thinking differently how we focus our efforts and resources.
Do you have a time frame for when you want to see this start to?
Well, we're starting to do that work now. We're really having those conversations, and we're really thinking about, you know, pulling resources together in some cases. But it is, now that I've been exposed to this side of the house, it is something that I realize that the deputy superintendent and his team they're all in on this. It's just the matter, right now they're in the place of trying to make sure that we have it all aligned in conjunction with everything else that we're doing. Because I think there's also a very clear reality around our students who speak a second language, English as a second language, so that kind of plays into effect. But there are way more conversations happening with early childhood centers and pre-K centers than there have been in the past.
Are you giving any thought to calling on the community to come and tutor kids individually?
I think a lot of that happens anyway. So I don't. If anything, it'd be more of an expansion of already existing sort of product. But the truth is, you need consistency around that. It's not sort of like a once a week sort of thing. There has to be a consistent level of input and sort of volunteerism around that. This idea of, we've extended the school day in some environments where kids, the work of the school day, goes into the afternoon. But I think there's starting to be a larger conversation about the community involvement in the early childhood. And you're starting to see some of the philanthropic community begin to invest heavily in the early childhood areas as well.
So you're trying to tap into that?
Yes.
If I can add, one of the other pieces to that puzzle is the partnership we have with agencies like the Children's Services Council. Yeah. Because as Dr. Fennoy said, the number of students that we have that come in pre-K and earlier that could be so deficient in language skills and everything, we need to look at the quality of daycare programs. We have a lot of really good ones that you would choose, but there's also challenges out there with home child care where that academic support that children need is not there. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that the Children's Services Council can do to help us with that. So that's building that partnership, and I think we're seeing it more and more today. 10 years ago, it wasn't quite the same thing, but there was a time when the state actually did fund pre-K programs, and that's another one of those that's gone away. Yeah. But the need is still there. We also have the need to make sure that our adult education programs are working with adult literacy, because adults who are not literate have a difficult time working with their children. So that's also part of that whole picture.
I wasn't, the state stopped funding pre-K programs? I didn't know
And
that.
to the degree, I don't remember exactly how it was funded. Mike could probably talk better. But there was a time that most of our schools had pre-K programs that went for half a day.
Yeah.
And then it started getting cut back. So we're not funded nearly as much now anymore, are we?
Yeah, I need to research that a little bit, 'cause it goes back away to the regular pre-K.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
okay. I'd like to know more about that. I know also, in speaking of partnerships, I remember a few years back when you came in, Chairman Shaw, that you talked about partnerships in the business community as well. Has that progressed at all, and are you guys seeking more of that in terms of what you're trying to do within the school system? Sorry.
Yeah, I think we definitely with the Ed Foundation and even recently with me coming on board, I've taken a lot of meetings with different businesses. You know, when we think about the reality of the changing job market, and you know, I had the privilege of being a principal in a career and technical education high school in another state. And part of that success of that school, so I had kids that could be in the same program and either went to MIT or just started their own business straight out of high school. And I think there is a growing conversation in the state of Florida around, because it's not the fact that we don't have jobs in Florida, we just don't have skilled laborers to fill those jobs. So the question for all of us is how do we move this ship in a direction that allows the business community to begin to pull new employees in that have the skills necessary to drive the workforce? And so, you know, again,
Are you hearing from them in terms of, do you have conversations with them, or have you had conversations
yes.
with them regarding, okay, boy, it'd be great if you guys were doing more of a certain thing, technical skills, whatever, you know, so that we could fill some of these jobs that we have?
Yeah, those conversations are having on, and in truth, a lot of our academy programs, the academy program development, a lot of times is in conjunction with conversations out of business community, economic council conversations,
Okay.
and even state level conversations around what's the new trend. So whether it's artificial intelligence, logistics, some of the things that are coming to Florida or are already here, that people are sort of bringing in employees to fill those jobs. We're figuring out how to make ourselves more nimble to meet that need here in Palm Beach County.
Okay. You
You want to
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I know.
Let's move ahead to school safety. That's the big one. You've read the grand jury. We've all read the grand jury report. We've all seen your reply to it. Why is it that the school district thinks it's better to have its own police department? The police department that you've got was created in an era long before there were mass shootings and the need for police to act more like SWAT teams than to be the community cop who's there in the school hallways. Why not leave this to the sheriff, who is a professional lawman, rather than you guys? You're educators. We're talking about reading, not stopping the bleeding.
Interesting question. So I hire professional lawmen, people with 30 years plus police. You know, my new police chief has been a police officer for over 30 years. I trust them fully. As a parent, they are doing an amazing job with that work. I think there's another clear line of demarcation, which is our work is strictly on our kids and our schools. That's it. We're not doing anything other than that. That's what we do, is work in the schools. So that's their mission and their focus.
Okay.
And I think that's very important. And at the end of the day, we're also still talking about children. And that is a skill set all into itself, with, you know, building those relationships. You know, our major purpose is to prevent crimes. And, you know, our officers have done an amazing job of preventing a lot more than the community will ever know, just because that's the nature of their work. Students tell them a lot of information. Not only do they work with the kids, but also the adults in that facility. So I think for me, but there's also another real reality around sort of the economics of all of this. The sheriff is much more expensive than we are. I pay my officers for 216 days, not 260 days. So it's just a different world in that regard. So me merging with another agency, it would just cost me more money. And that doesn't make any sense.
But some of your cohort do this already. I mean, Broward, for example.
The county subsidizes those. We don't get any money from the county to subsidize our police department.
Yeah, Pasco County, 2 weeks ago, I was in Tampa at the Florida School Boards Association and had a chance to talk to different superintendents about their plan for this. And there are counties, and I believe Pasco is one, they have a contract with the sheriff. Those sheriff's deputies are in duty with the school district, paid by the school district for 188 days a year. After those 188 days are over with, those deputies go back to work for the sheriff's department on road patrol or whatever assignment they have. So to keep control, they're not paying a deputy for 12 months, they're paying the deputy for 188 days, which is essentially the days that teachers and students are in school.
Okay.
Did that appeal to you? That's an idea?
Well, I think it just reinforces what Dr. Fennoy said about the duty days we have. Our officers and our need, there's no particular need to have police officers sitting on any of our campuses when our schools are totally empty during the summer.
Okay.
So when even the grand jury report said, well, this is not a real issue. It is a real issue. Those officers need to be out on the street doing something else. So when we look at our salaries, when we look at our pay and the days that our officers are on duty, we need them on school campuses when school's in session and when special activities. So really, it's a conversation that makes no sense when you compare a law enforcement out in the community who needs to be on duty 12 months when school police officers are not.
Okay, well, everything you say is understood. But I think the real question that underlies that report is, in the event of a real catastrophic emergency like you had in Parkland, when you have to have great coordination among law enforcement, a quick response, get trained officers to the scene rapidly. They pointed out a good number of deficiencies in the district's police department, everything from communications with the radios to not enough cars. What do you do? What are you going to do?
Well, I think at this point, I think the reality is in an event such as that, then you're going to call on all the other municipalities and sheriff anyway, in worst case scenario, just like you did in Parkland, where the sheriff's office was in control. There was no school police in Broward County. And so I think, you know, in my conversation with the sheriff and the Police Chiefs Association, if we find ourselves in that situation, everyone's coming, all hands on deck. And I think it's also important to state that increasingly, you know, with the hiring of our new chief, who's coming from the Jupiter Police Department, the sort of interagency, you know, interdependencies in these interagencies. And, you know, right now, they're training together as we speak. And so I think part of the future of school policing, now, and I think it's also, you have to understand, prior to February 14th, we weren't even having this conversation. True. So you're talking about 3 months to really, one, double the size of my police force, but now take recommendations from the grand jury, recommendations from the Council of Great City Schools, and just the entire state, as everyone tries to figure out this next phase. What will it look like in the future? Which is why, for me, it was bringing a police chief to the cabinet level, hiring someone, going through the process where we were able to select someone with over 30 years of experience in the municipality who now wants to focus on kids. Now, those professionals will figure out all of these pieces that you're talking about. But I think the infrastructure is there. It seems like there's a great working relationship amongst these groups today. Okay. But moving forward, I think it will be an evolution over the next coming months and even years, I think. Because there's also a very different piece around the elementary school officer. The idea of a sentry standing in front of the school with a AR-15 and a helmet at my son's elementary school, I don't think that's the reality that the community wants. So what is that interaction amongst full-time officers and 5-year-olds going to look like on a day-to-day basis?
Okay.
I do hear a disconnect between the defenses of the department and the fact that one of the first things you did was get a new police chief. Well, you must have seen things that are deficient in the department.
Oh, no, we were doubling in size. So as the new CEO of an organization, I took an opportunity to make sure I have the right team in place and to move that position from a non-cabinet level position to a cabinet level position. And once I moved that position up, I opened it up to see if I can get the right person on the team. I didn't bring anybody from the outside. So I opened it up and tried to get the best people for any job that I had available. That was just a CEO decision.
And if I can add, you know, the work that we've done with the Criminal Justice Commission, some of the others over the years of trying to have in-place mutual aid agreements between municipalities, the sheriff's office, the school district, has been something that as a district we worked on really hard for a long period of time. And it was to ensure that in a critical incident that response and communication was there. The radio issue, to me, that's an easy one to fix because I don't know the details of what it was, but there was one radio system several years ago. Everybody was looking like, I think it was called Open Sky, if you remember that story. Yes. And when that started, it sounded like it was a great idea, and it was a radio system that would work for everybody. Once cities and the school district, everybody got into Open Sky, we found out it didn't work. Right. So now there's a transition over, and some of those, I think our real challenge is to make sure that whatever connection we have between the sheriff's office, every municipality, both with radios and online, that's in place. And that's part of the challenge that we have because we need to make sure if there are any holes there, we fill those in. The other part is if the sheriff had taken over the school district, he would immediately be 75 officers short, just the same as we were. He'd be in exactly the same position of having to add those people. So it wasn't a difference of better service. He would have been in the same challenge, and also in making a decision about how he would staff the schools. The plan, you've heard everything from 3, 2, 1, other kinds of things. He would have been budgeted to do that. If he wanted to double that, he'd have to find the money. And the only place is to come back and say, okay, instead of paying $30 million a year, y'all are going to double that because I want twice the number of officers. So there's more to that picture than just saying for the sheriff to take it over. And from my experience, and I've been a principal at different levels, I've seen what our police officers do. I know the kinds of cases that they work. These are highly professional people who know what they're doing. And the important thing is how much they've done to prevent some of the kinds of things that could happen on a campus because of the relationships that they have. And that's where I think we have the advantage. Plus, we're also dealing with it in a whole different way we've never had to deal with before.
Okay, I guess I'm still sitting here trying to understand why you need to hold on to it. You know, and I mean, I understand the argument you're making, that not so much that you can't do the job. I'm trying to figure out why you still need to do the job. Why not let an experienced, large law enforcement agency take over this responsibility and the school district focus on education? So that's kind of what I'm getting to in terms of I'm trying to understand, you know. So I'm not asking whether or not you can do it. Why not let that go, which is where I think Howard was coming from. Why not let it go and focus more on education so you're not having to focus on law enforcement?
Well, I guess we could make that argument for every facet of my organization, right? Transportation.
No, not for teaching math.
No, but I still have
You have a transportation
I have the district's
system.
largest transportation, the county's largest transportation service, restaurant service, HR function. You know, we run multiple large businesses under the umbrella. We have over 22,000 plus employees. So I think for us, it becomes a matter. I guess the reason why not is because there's a certain level of understanding of the ins and outs and the complexities of schools.
Okay.
There's one. So again, our officers train in the school. So with over 180 plus schools, just even the grounds themselves, getting in and out of those spaces. I think there's also, a reality of our work to try to stop children from being put in the system prior to you know, while they're still kids. So there's a difference between, you know, child issues and adult issues. And so I think part of our officers' role is to be a solution to help kids make better choices. So again, the SRO function and someone who works in the streets is a completely different mindset. Again, it's just a different role. Okay. And so I think we have to be really clear on what that means in terms of policing. And I think that's, so even in that role, there's a difference between policing, security, and then all the mental health stuff that's associated with this. As adolescents.
The sheriff does run the biggest mental health unit in the county.
Not with kids.
Well, I don't know if there's some kids.
Not to the extent of we're sitting in on our teams and with our counselors, being part of that sort of proactive approach.
Okay.
To finding out what's going on with kids and helping solutions to give them the resources that are necessary for them. Okay. So I just think it's just it's a cultural difference.
Okay, got it.
From where we sit now at the end of June to middle of August when you've got to open school, where do things stand with being able to staff the schools as the new law requires?
We just did a presentation to the board last week. We're well on the way. Of the 400 plus applicants we had for our 75 positions, we're starting to funnel those through. We've hired, I think, 30. We have another, a couple of dozen in the pipeline. The 11 municipalities have agreed to help us. They're going to be providing close to 47 officers during that time period.
47.
The Sheriff's Department is going to offer us another 10. And so we're actually, and then there's other officers outside of schools that we can deploy to schools as we backfill. As we
other officers outside of school.
So I have over 150 officers. We have there are officers that are in the district office, so detectives, K-9 units,
okay,
all of those other officers
aren't out in the field.
Yeah,
so
their everyday job isn't in the school. They're part of the other part of the team.
Oh, okay.
So can every parent expect that at their school, all 183 schools, there'll be the security officer will be there?
Yes.
Go ahead, Mike.
Can I just add something as to why we have a school police department? Palm Beach is fairly unique. I think there's about a half dozen school districts around the state that had their own police force, but you're seeing more districts now consider that or start to go that way. And Broward, which was ground zero for the tragedy, is actually now talking about forming their own police department.
Okay.
So there are benefits, and the only other thing I just want to mention, and I haven't been here for a while, I believe our school police actually led the way on a lot of the active shooter training.
Yeah.
And after Columbine, and unfortunately we've had other tragedies, right? That I don't want people to they're not necessarily soft on some of these threats to schools, and they train for it. And in many cases, they've trained more than the sheriff's office did.
Interesting.
And again, when I was at the Florida School Board Association talking to different people, a lot of school board members were asking about our school police department and everything interest. The biggest problem that most districts have is they're so small that they couldn't afford to even begin to get the people. And there were even some districts that said they are talking among districts of looking to try to organize possibly their own. Now, I have no idea how close that is to being a real solution.
Okay.
But if you've never been a principal in a school with a police officer, it's really hard to understand what those police officers are doing on the school campus all day and the kinds of things. And there really is a big difference from the typical police officer on the street to the kind of officers that are on school campuses.
Okay.
The other point I've heard Dr. Fennoy make before in other conversations about this was just that we need a level of school police, whether we went with the sheriff or not, right? We have this Jessica Lunsford Act. We're doing background checks on all our employees and vendors, the fingerprinting, all that. So you've got some of these support functions that I don't expect, that people may not be thinking about when you talk about that type of merger or takeover. We've got a professional standards department that will have to work hand in hand with some of our detectives if we have employees accused of crimes. We have an inspector general that will partner with our police department on different things. So a portion of what we're paying for now for school police is actually serving the district well in some of these other support areas.
security for the 800 buses that are on the roads. So these are not functions that the sheriff's department would get involved in. He, you know, in my conversations with him, it's schools, not all of the other ancillary functions that exist that our school police manages for us.
The other thing is consistency with officers. And one of the things that I've had some discussion with when I've heard the interest of the sheriff is there's no assurance that we'd have the same officer on school campuses 5 days a week, 180 days a year, because people work shifts and officers rotate. And we have the advantage of having the same officer on the school campus every single day. At many of our schools, the police officers know the name of every single student on the campus. And there's a big advantage to having that kind of relationship. And if we have people rotating on shifts and not being consistent the whole year, those are the kind of things that we would have to have conversations on before we could even entertain that.
Let me be
and
clear.
it's important.
Be clear about something too. I know you guys have already said you're not considering this arming of teachers and other staff and everything.
Yeah.
You're also not considering something that some other school districts like Polk are doing, which is
The Guardian program.
yeah, the Guardian program. Let me be clear about that, because I know we've written some about that, but you're not considering that either. Okay, all right.
We've touched on mental health services a couple of times. Are you actively beefing up what we're providing for students to try to understand what's going on in their heads?
Yeah, we are, but I think we all have to recognize the challenge around people who even want to do that type of work anymore. The type of coursework that it takes for people to actually go into that profession. And so part of why I think where we're at an advantage is working with all the other local agencies to partner with us. That is very important to us. I think the ideal state moving forward of all of these different mental health workers in the schools, that is going to be a work in progress. Just trying to find personnel who want to do that is going to be a big challenge for all of us. So I think our local agencies become a lifeblood for us in this line of work.
In the grand jury report, there was some discussion about how the guidance counselor's time is allotted. The idea being that there's too much time being diverted to paperwork, other kinds of things, and not the kids themselves. Do they generally describing that correctly in your view?
As a former high school principal, I would say yeah. They spend a lot of time making sure kids graduate from high school, and all of those sort of mandates and all of the things associated with that. And so I think nationally we're all trying to figure out a better ratio from counselors. But I think during the recession, those are some of the first positions to leave. And that's just, and so as we're trying to recover from that, doing a very tough sort of economic situation in the state of Florida, that's just tough. Do I think we can do a better job? Absolutely. I think everything's up for discussion at this point. But the jobs that they're doing outside of what the average citizen would consider normal for a counselor still have to be done. So that's the challenge. The high stakes testing requires a whole lot of accountability for a lot of people. And so how do we make sure we do all of that? So I think the conversation is open, and we're going to be making some adjustments. But I have to be very honest that is just one area where it is easier said than done. Because you let my son not graduate because somebody failed to make sure their transcript was right. There's going to be some problems.
Okay.
Just also.
So you're saying that, well, okay. So it's just hard to find people who want to do this kind of work, the guidance counselor kind of work. Is that one of the things you were saying?
No, I mean the whole psychiatrist, mental health worker profession in general.
Yeah.
Well, not just schools. I'm talking about in general.
Okay.
Because you have conflicts in foreign countries. We have men and women coming back from the military. So even when I spent the weekend talking to some mental health workers who specifically work in PSD cases with the military, they're short-staffed. It's just one of those jobs right now where the demand is becoming greater for all of us. And I think Parkland definitely said, hey, we need more mental health workers. Mm-hmm. But again, it's not like there's a pipeline. It's not like kids are going to college and say, hey, I want to go be a mental health worker, because it's just not out there. So we are already in conversation with some of the local universities. We're even considering at some point putting an academy structure in our school in the high school level where kids can start that work, start to get, figuring out if that's the job they want to do in high school. And then maybe that could transcend into the university level. Maybe we can hire them our own, grow our own sort of mental health workers over time. But I think you just think about the reality of all the schools in the state of Florida. If the community expectation that we have increased mental health workers in every school in the state of Florida, well, just for me, that's 187 different people. And if between police and mental health workers, if I were to go with the recommendation of the grand jury, I would add 750 people to our payroll, approximately. To meet that recommendation.
Between police and mental health workers.
Yeah.
Now, and the mental health workers, that also included discussion that the grand jury had about having psychologists on every school campus.
Yeah, right.
So that's another 197 additional people.
Yeah, plus
So,
the metal detectors and the vestibules and the
Right.
cards and
Yeah.
right. I mean, you could.
And it's
you could
where,
go on and on.
quite honestly, and now this, I'm only speaking for myself on this comment. The grand jury, they did a good job. They looked at everything. What frustrated me was that so much of what they reported were things that we were already doing. And it was something appointed to get a grand jury to do this. And they give us recommendations about things we already knew were things that we needed. But they did fail to address the issue that we're in this position now because of February 14th. This is not the same world today that it was on February 13th.
Okay.
So all of us have to be in a position to make the changes that we need to make. There was no recommendation from the grand jury about how we're supposed to pay for this. And when you listen to legislators, quite honestly, I think Sonia heard me say this, I think, at the board meeting the other night. Quite honestly, if that shooting had not happened when the legislature was in session, we wouldn't be sitting here today with any allocation from the state legislature related to safety. I mean, I just
Okay.
really question whether or not that would have ever happened.
I'll give you that one.
So instead of sitting out and saying, y'all need to do this, you're short in this, you're not doing what you need to do here, let us make the decisions, and a year from now come and ask us whether we made the right decision on having our own police department. If we deliver, we deliver. And I think we can. And that's where I think we're accountable.
And I think it also needs to be stated clearly, in reference to this conversation on the merger. Either way, we have to pay for it. I think I don't know if people,
Okay.
the grand jury report didn't say that. I don't know if people think that if we merge with the sheriff's department now, that's part of our budget that we just get to keep. Absolutely not. Not only do we not get to keep it, it will be significantly increased, and over time, we can't even control what that budget will be. It will be dictated to us moving forward. And in our current sort of state of affairs in the state of Florida, losing that much control over a significant portion of your budget doesn't make any sense for a large organization. It just doesn't.
Okay. When you say significant, what kind of money are we talking?
Well, the grand jury says I should increase it by $30 million.
From the current what?
From the current $20 million that we spend, we should increase it to close to $50 million.
Okay.
Well, I did notice that the grand jury report starts off with a discussion about how the taxpayers fund everything, and so therefore they have a right to look at it.
Yeah.
But as you say, in the end, they don't talk about how the taxpayers are supposed to foot the bill for the other $30 million.
And, two other parts to this. One of them is there was nothing in the legislation that assures that this will be continuing money.
Right.
So
Right.
in January, we could be looking at no funding for what we got this year. The other one is there was a report, and I think the article you wrote about the issue with the reserves was on point, because our reserves are not recurring dollars. And if we put that into the police department, we're not only have no funding for next year, but we have no way of getting that reserve built up, with those demands. So
Okay.
it was something I don't think the grand jury understood at all. Mike?
You guys probably know this already, but one of the things I've been trying to educate people on is just a difference between, the sheriff goes to the county for his budget request. County commission.
Oh, he sends somebody.
Well, yeah, he's got a guy for that. But anyway, the structure's totally different. So the county commissioners, if you look at their tax rate, they have more autonomy. They're not dependent on the legislature to tell them what their tax rate's going to be, like Mr. Shaw is and our board members. So what they've done is they've kept the exact same millage rate for 7 years. I think it's 4.78 mils or thereabouts. So when property values went up 7% in Palm Beach County last year, their revenue essentially grew 7%. So if the sheriff needs a 6% increase for his deputies or whatever, they've got that ability to say, okay, this is not the year to cut taxes. We'll keep our rate the same, which is effectively a tax increase, is what we're learning very well from the legislature when it comes on school taxes. And it's been like that, right? So at least they have a better opportunity to be able to absorb these type of increases each year where, you know, we've looked at the past 3 years, we've gotten a 1% increase, a 1.39% increase, and then another 1.39% increase this year with a lot of strings attached for school safety. So that is a legitimate concern about how would we go about paying for it to be able to keep the sheriff's office contract, you know, to be able to anticipate and cover those rising costs. Because it's kind of apples and oranges right now, the two environments that we operate in.
Okay.
If you were to go to the tax increase, ask the voters for the tax increase that you're talking about, well, I know that at the beginning of discussions, as I understand, you were talking mainly about trying to boost teacher pay. Now you have the costs of security to factor in. How much could you accomplish?
Quite a
bit. The size of the tax increase you're talking about.
So, and you're right, this conversation would potentially, we knew we'd be back in 2018 in front of the voters again. We've had this $250,000 for the fine arts, which has been very successful in protecting those programs, and the community has supported it well. We've had, you know, the last few rounds, I'd say, of teacher salary negotiations have been tough because we've had little to work with, and we worked hard, but you'll hear the issues teacher salary compression. And what we see is the bulk of our teachers are now in the $40,000 to $45,000 salary range, and some of those teachers may have 7-8 years experience, and they don't feel like there's enough. We don't value their experience because they see new teachers coming in at $41,000 right behind them. So it was a contentious issue in bargaining. We recognized it, so we agreed to have like this joint committee of the teachers union and district staff study the issue. So we studied it. We kind of validated that there is a concern there, and we looked at for potential recommendations. The only way we can really do anything to boost revenue as a school district in Florida is to turn to the voters. So we were talking about improving teacher salaries. That would take about $500,000 to do it justice. So
Okay. On top of the $250,000.
So we've got the $250,000, which we want to keep and continue those 650 fine arts teachers and choice programs. $500,000 would generate about $100 million, and then you could use that to boost the pay of our roughly 13,000 teachers.
Okay.
And we arrived at $500,000 because basically that's what it took to have a meaningful impact. And the proposal out of our group was that we recognized that teachers have 5 years of experience, we'd give them a retention supplement of $5,000, and then teachers have 10 years or more would get a $10,000 retention supplement. And that resonated with the teachers, like, yeah, that's enough to make it worth my while, because I did a lower cost version, you know, at $250,000, and they said, you know, $2,500, that's not really a game changer, but $5,000 or $10,000
Right now, I know
in the first 6 years is very high. It's over 10% all through the first 6 years, and some years it's even greater. But there's a chart floating around. I could get you.
We probably hire close to 1,600 teachers a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which
That's
is not good.
All, and the number of people, we're also seeing with the drop program, more teachers. How many
Retiring.
people were retiring out
Oh,
of
my
drop
goodness.
each year? We're seeing that. And that's made a big difference in the thing. Plus, we're growing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and we're getting bigger.
combining all of them, it's a lot. I think it's important, and Mike can give you the detail on this.
Yeah, I just want to
It's
maybe. Oh, I'm sorry.
unfortunate that we even have to go to the public asking for this, because this is something that, quite honestly, if the legislature had been funding education since 2008, even at the level we were in 2008, and then with growth and everything, some of these, we wouldn't be having the conversations. Our capital needs wouldn't have to be dealt with by having the sales tax if they had continued with the PICO, the public education capital outlay funding.
Right.
So it all goes back to a level But the good thing is, the public here has understood that education is important.
You mentioned earlier, before I forget, you mentioned earlier about the growth in the value of property and how
Right.
that translated into an increase for the county. And I know that the legislature took that back from the schools and everything. What kind of money were we talking about
So
there?
they've done it 3 years straight, and this was Speaker Corcoran was famously quoted saying, "Hell no, they're not going to be any school tax increase or whatever." So, but just the impact of Palm Beach County, if you look at that 3 years of rolling back the millage, it's $178 million a year to our operating budget. It's greater than what we're trying to go to the voters to
By not
so-
allowing the school, just to absorb the property tax,
Right.
not increase the tax rate.
Right.
So, technically, our referendum question, it will be a tax, recognized as a tax increase, but I could argue it's a restoration, that it's kind of trying to undo what the legislature has done for us the last 3 years here in Palm Beach
So
County.
if you had been allowed to simply enjoy the fruits of the growth in property value in the county, it'd be more than enough to pay for that.
Absolutely.
This is what
Yes.
you're asking for now.
Yes.
And to get back again to the
Say-
purpose of the.
Mike, that also would have included the sales tax, right?
No, I'm just speaking to the operating
property
school
tax.
tax revenues.
Sorry.
The sales tax was a local solution to another state-induced problem where they cut the board's local capital improvement millage
Right,
authority from
you
2
throw
mils to
money and
1.5
other
mils.
stuff,
So,
yeah.
you could make the same argument. You go back a little further. But I think I still
Again,
owed you
about
a
the-
number on the
about the
millage.
uses of the millage.
Right.
You described very well about how it's going to help with.
Teachers.
With teachers. What
Funds.
about safety?
So our plan was that a quarter of a mill would be dedicated to school safety, and that's got there's two halves to that. So quarter mill safety would be both in the way of school police and mental health, and that would be that's what would allow us to truly double the size of our police department. We've added 75 officers, but if we wanted to get to 3 officers in every the 3-2-1 or a formula thereabouts, you'd really need about another 75 officers or so.
That explains somewhere this 3-2-1 thing.
That's the 3 per
Grand
high
jury
school.
report.
Oh,
Yeah.
geez, okay,
That was-
fine, okay,
3 officers in every high school, 2 in every middle school,
sorry,
1
I
in
forgot.
each elementary.
Gotcha.
And there's debate on that, whether or not that's adequate. There may be some schools, a high school that may only need 2, another one who may need 4.
Yeah, but that's
So
still-
that'd be a decision.
Well, that's the one where they're essentially saying like one resource officer for every 1,000 students, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I
But
thought.
do you see that as a useful guideline, a rule of thumb?
So step one is to meet the original mandate, which is an officer in every school. That's number one.
We know that, but,
And
so
then-
now you got 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 in a high school, say.
Yeah, I mean, so I think in a perfect state, if I had all the resources in the world, yes. The question then becomes, there are certain schools where the activity is just different. And I also want to be clear with the community, there's a difference between security and then policing. So you'll find yourself in certain schools, because just by virtue of having more officers, you're going to find more stuff. And again, it's not going to necessarily be violent crimes. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that's out there when you just have a population. So,
Yeah.
so there's going to be more interaction between officers and police. And that's going to be a shift for a lot of communities who haven't had that level of touch
Well, let's talk
points.
about Boca High, for example, which I think has somewhere close to 3,000, if
Over-
not more
yeah, over-
students. One officer isn't gonna, you're not thinking about leaving one officer to handle 3,000.
No, we
more
would
than
put
3,000
more into a
students.
school like that.
Okay,
But that comes with a new reality for kids. It's just,
Okay.
I just want people to
having
understand.
more of that around.
Just having more of it around, there's just going to be more stuff that they'll be able to get to.
Hmm.
And then, and then the community just really has to understand. And again, as a parent, I feel more secure. But I think you have to remember, we're dealing with kid stuff all day long, every day. So whether it's, small conflicts, social media,
Right.
drugs, we're gonna get a lot more of that just because you have more people in the building to find it.
You guys, Sonia, Andrew, anything from you guys?
What does the polling look like for the referendum? I think you guys or with some group working with you guys had done some polling on that. Can you talk a little about the membership?
We're working with a political advisor on the effort, and then he had access to some private polling that just was shared kind of verbally with us. But I was told it was pretty supportive, that there was there seemed to be an appetite in the community that they recognized teacher salaries as a need and school safety. And then the fine arts, that program is still widely supported.
Okay.
So we felt like, at least in crafting the ballot question, that the needs that we identified were those that would also hopefully be supported by the community.
Can you be more specific about the numbers? What numbers we're looking at polling-wise?
It's, you know, I think you want to be, 55% or greater, 60% or so going into these things, and it was above that threshold.
About 55%.
Yeah, it was high. There's a 5% margin of error, I think, on any of these things and stuff, so it's not exact, but we were just kind of wanted some feedback as to, and they offered it, that there is support out there.
And who did the polling?
I coordinated through Rick Iznani.
Okay. His firm did it, or his firm had some other people do it?
I don't believe so. I think it was another group.
Another group? You don't know who it was, though?
No, sir.
Okay. And they didn't give you any, so this is sort of anecdotal, but you're obviously, as you strategize the referendum, you're basing it on these numbers, I guess, in large part, right? Or do you have some other metric you've used to decide, do we go for the full mill, the half mill? I assume there's variance in
No,
support, right?
it's been based on need, what it would take to kind of address these funding concerns. The half mill for the teachers, continuation. The quarter mill for the fine arts would not only fund the 650 teachers we have, but if the property values continue to grow, we could actually expand those programs. And then the quarter mill for safety, I was kind of going through a little bit. That 50 million, we talked about mental health a little bit. The money for mental health, we got 4.3 million. It's a brand new categorical allocation from the state. 4.3 million for Palm Beach County. About 400,000 of that will go to the charter schools because they represent about 10% of our enrollment. So we've got 3.9 million to try to provide mental health services across over 180 schools, 175,000 kids. It barely scratches the surface.
And that's the one-time thing we're talking about again.
Well, it's to be determined.
Until they say it's
there's parts of
continuing.
this 400 million that went into security or
Right.
safety. There are pieces that we know are just one time, like the 99 million for campus hardening grants that we can apply for, which we're pursuing that, and potentially we might bring in about 6 million based on the size of our district. That's a small amount when you look at 7 billion in school building assets across the counties. And fortunately, we've already been doing that as part of our work. But the mental health, like where I started with that, so when I go to my counterpart, Deputy Superintendent Keith Oswald, and say, okay, you got 3.9 million to spend. That's not put in a position in every school. He's got to come up with a couple teams and then to service the whole county, and then take advantage of contracted services through some of these other partners throughout the county. So it's not going to go real far. So when we started talking about the millage referendum, we said, look, if we could dedicate a quarter mil to safety, that gives you the money you need to double the police department and put a mental health professional in every school, and add more school psychologists across the district and more counselors. And it still doesn't fall short of those grand jury counselor recommendations, because those are just big
Mike,
money. But but I really feel like this full mill package is responsive to the grand jury's report.
Yeah.
It's responsive to what we're hearing from our parents. It's responsive to our teachers, and it's really the only way you're going to see a meaningful change in those areas.
Mike, can you also address the issue that the money we got for school safety was not new money?
So we've been getting, this was something else I think that was lost on the grand jury a little bit. There's been a safe schools categorical for a long time.
Right.
And it was actually cut several years ago, and it's kind of sort of funding to dwindle a little bit. But we were getting about $4.3 million a year. Like if you just looked at this past school year behind us, we get a little over $4 million. We spent nearly $21 million to run our own school police department. Now, the grand jury opined that spending any tax money, if you weren't going to spend what they saw fit, then we were in essence wasting taxpayers' dollars. But like I took offense to that, just knowing some of the work our guys do. I mean, we've got 150 officers out there that are making schools safer. So I don't think it was a wasted effort. And I think it showed the board's commitment to say, look, the state's saying you need to have at least $4 million worth of safety initiatives. We're doing $21 million because we feel strongly enough about it. And that's they're having to make sacrifices to make that possible. So I guess that's it, but
And
this
the-
is a good chance
And then
to.
the $400 million came out
Oh.
of our operating.
So that's yeah, Mr. Shaw's is right. The other thing that was a little bit frustrating was having watched the budget process very closely for 28 years now. Florida's revenue, their general revenue is growing about 4% roughly for the last several years. We've been in a period of kind of slow, sustained economic growth. And if I pointed further back in my career, I used to be able to read the tea leaves and say, the state does a 3-year economic forecast, I can kind of see what's going on, and education was almost half of the state general revenue, and I would say, okay, that's what you can kind of expect to see. That does not hold anymore. So you've got the state revenue growing about 4%, and then this funding per student growing a little bit over 1%. There's now a prioritization of the tax cuts that are trumping education priorities, and education has been deprioritized in terms of funding, and it's been going on. It's really apparent when you just look at what's happened. We always look back, where were we before the recession, where are we now? And that's where I can show we're way behind, right? And you get to see some of these numbers, $2,500 per student. Consider you got 192,000 kids across all schools, district, and charter. You're just starting to talk about real money. I mean, this is $500 million plus shortfall. So the thing that played out this year, though, that was just really illustrates, I think, what the legislature does when it comes to education. You got a state board of education that recommended a 2.74% increase per kid, right? Governor came out with the exact same recommendation initially. Then we get into like late January in the session, and the House has been kind of calling the shots, and we're at a 1.37% per student increase. Then we had the tragedy on Valentine's Day. Everything turns to school safety. And at the end of the day, in mid-March when they wrap up the whole state budget and the governor signs it, it was 1.39%. And the other way you hear it was $100 per student before the tragedy. It's $101.50 after the tragedy. So they really didn't put more money into it. They said, okay, well, we were going to spend X amount on education this year. This is what we've done the last couple of years. We'll just tie it all to safety. I'm still a little bit naive, I guess, because when the governor first came out and said put $500 million into safety, he said, look, we just got a revenue forecast that was a little more upbeat, and they expected to have some new revenue over the next 2 years. He said, if this is the year we can't cut taxes, so be it. So I was hopeful that the legislature was saying, oh, wow, they're really going to do something here and not just shift the existing money again to a new priority of the day. And I don't know if people all understand that, because I think there's a lot of legislature people campaigning now, running around slapping themselves on the back for saying we took care of the safety issue.
I was going to ask then, because as you were saying, there's always been a lot of public support in Palm Beach County among its taxpayers for education, really. And the district, I think, has been pretty fortunate about that. But you're kind of getting ready to test that a little bit here. And is that the reason for the pause on Wednesday? To step back and say, okay, look, if we come at this, we better make sure that we come correct.
I don't know that was the reason. I think it was more to make sure that everything is in line, so that whatever the ballot language is going to be ballot language that we can feel comfortable with going to the public. And we had about 2 weeks flexibility there to deal with it. But then there's also the issue of charter schools, and it's always the,
I was going to ask about that. It seems like y'all are trying to work with them or whatever on this. Are there any other partners that you all are trying to bring into this mix to kind of help you make a sale here?
Nobody else.
Because you do have to make a sale in November.
No, I think it was clear that the board on Wednesday believed that there is a place for us to ensure the safety of every child in the county. So the charter school kids were included in that. I think where the debate is, and we've had the conversation multiple times about for-profit charters and whether or not the money goes directly to schools and everything. So that's got to be.
How do you make sure that happens? That the money goes where it's supposed to go? I mean, because if I was thinking about this afterwards, and I said, well, if the charter schools get a certain percentage, let's say 10%, and they get a check for whatever that's supposed to be for the school resource officer, they decide to do something else with it, what recourse does the district have?
Right. And that's our
No, I mean,
challenge.
That's the
Yeah,
challenge.
so
Again, this is only my opinion. I'm not speaking for the whole board in this one.
Can there be?
I see that there are some ways. I think that with the safety money, it could almost be a grant directly to the charter school specifying how those dollars could be used, for
Yeah,
example.
that's what I'm saying. Can you guys, can the
We
district
hope
go
so,
that
and
far?
that's what we need.
You can't spend
clear
this money on
legal
anything.
opinions from. So it's a tough one.
Would they not agree to that? I mean,
I think they would. I would hope if they really care about the safety of students, that they would be jumping and saying, oh, please give us a hand.
okay, all right. I'm sorry, Sonia, go ahead.
The polling that you spoke about how this would play, did you mention the charters and the language in that polling?
I don't believe so.
No.
No, we've been under mindset, we've made it clear that it's always been dedicated to just to district-run schools, because we feel like that's where we have the highest level of accountability. We do have a standing independent referendum oversight committee that's monitoring the current quarter mill, so they're already in place to review, if the full mill should be approved, we'd still have that same committee. They meet every quarter, they go through every expenditure, so that I can show them that every expenditure is in line with the ballot language that was approved. And it's pretty simple now because it's just almost like a payroll listing of 650 teachers, and what they're teaching across the district. So that would get a little more complicated. I think there are things we could do if charters were to be a piece of it to try to, that committee, I would feel like the charters have to be subject to that same oversight committee. The difference is you may be catching things, like we control, I can control the district who gets a check cut to them and all that. We can't control the charter schools, how they're writing checks, how they're spending money. We've seen some bad actors that have taken advantage of that. So you may be in a situation where you're playing catch up, and then maybe you can shut them down, and stop sharing the revenue, and then you may get a legal challenge over that. But
You don't think the taxpayers would actually, I mean, this is a matter of accountability now. You don't think the taxpayers actually would demand that, okay, if you're asking me for this extra money, this extra money from property taxes, that this money has to be used?
Rick, I hope they would, and I think they would.
Yeah.
Where our
I think
problem
they already
is-
do.
I think they already
Yeah,
do.
It's-
where our
but-
problem is, the legislature doesn't seem to care, because every time that school districts get tough about dealing with charter school accountability issues, a new law is passed that protects the charter schools even more. So, and the capital outlay, perfect example of how that played. So last year, they backed off because of because of lawsuits, and there's no assurances that next legislative session, they're not gonna go back and restore that. We've got to take some of our capital millage and give it to charter schools.
So you expect to have language in a couple of weeks?
Yes.
To vote on as a board? Okay.
But
Ask
it
a
will
question
reflect the
regarding
millage that you're talking, the goal, the aims that you've already described. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, July 18th.
July 18th is the date.
July 18th, okay. All right, Andrew, one,
Yeah, is the district doing anything regarding that, working with the charters? There's some talk of negotiation with the charters, trying to get every charter school to sign some sort of grant agreement, I'm guessing? Is that, what's going on with that?
I've done a little work on that. It's there's 49 charter schools out there, so they're not. It's potentially a lot of different people to try to bring to the table. There's a charter school alliance that reached out to me that represents over 10,000 of the charter school kids in our district, and it's some of the bigger charter schools. And we've had some preliminary discussions about what that might look like if we were going to try to provide some additional safe schools money, or how that might work.
Would you need all of the charters to co-sign this, or could you do it, would some opt in for this grant, others would just get money? Would they get no money if they don't opt in, or would they get their
What
per?
I'm working on is drafting like a boilerplate template agreement for the superintendent to consider in our board, and then if they feel it hits the mark, for our needs and gives the board a level of comfort that we're going to be able to help the charter schools in this way, then I would do a letter to all 49 charters and say, here's the offer, and it get back to us.
okay.
But right now, I'm just getting a little bit of input from this kind of one stakeholder group that has a big chunk of the charter schools, and I haven't had time to, talk to all 49.
Would this affect the ballot language? Would the word non-charter or district school be clarified somehow? You think that would not be affected?
I mean, that's the big question for our board on July 18th. There was two ideas floated, I think, at the last board meeting. Either you just you include the charters in the ballot language and they get a share of the revenue directly, or the charters be excluded from the ballot initiative altogether, and then the board works to maybe help charter schools out with their security needs through another funding source, or through providing some other type of support.
Okay, and so what you're talking about is that the latter, where they wouldn't be on the ballot, but you guys work it out after the fact? And with
Right.
some other, okay.
Yeah, if they're on the ballot, there's really no need to, there would just be, I guess, trying to bring them up to speed with, as far as the newfound accountability measures they're gonna have to try to comply with.
Okay.
Okay. All right, we're good, and we appreciate you guys coming in and speaking with us.
Well, thank you
And
very much.
if there's something we didn't cover, though, you're always welcome to talk a little bit more.
I think you covered it.
I think
Okay.
I think you checked all the boxes on that.
All right. Well, again, CFO Burke, Superintendent Fennoy, and Chairman Shaw, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Rick.
Good.
Howard, thank you.